We're looking at lesson 11 here in the book of Esther. It's such a great book. The story here in the book of Esther, while Esther and Song of Solomon neither contain the name of God, I don't know any other book of the Bible that has the presence of God be more apparent than the book of Esther. The name of God does not have to appear. And there are a lot of times when God is working in our lives and we don't see it. We don't feel His presence. We feel like maybe that God has abandoned us. And that's not true, right? But that's the way we feel. And guess what? The way you feel is the way you feel. And you can't just discount that. You can't throw away and say, well, I feel like this, but okay, now I feel better. Now, your feelings are your feelings. And so you have to deal with those feelings about the presence of God. And there are times, sometimes it feels like God's not there. So what do? Well, you go to God and tell Him. You don't need to go to your neighbor and tell them that you don't feel like God, but you do need to go to God. I think sometimes we tell people what we should tell God, and we tell God what we should tell people.
That's right.
But we do need to go to God and say, God, I'm hurt, I'm sad, I don't feel like you love me. Now, intellectually, biblically, you know absolutely that He does. You know He said He'd never leave you, never forsake you. But if that's the way you feel, you go to God. In the book of Esther, we see God working behind the scenes. I don't know what Mordecai felt when he told about Bigthan and Teresh, how that they were going to kill the king, and that plot was overturned because of him. And he didn't get anything for that. He didn't get patted on the back. He didn't get thanked for that. I imagine that probably hurt his feelings a little bit. I mean, he's a human being. Now, he doesn't complain about it. We don't have that record, but I'm sure deep down, feel like, well, I didn't even get to thank you out of this. I saved his life, But when the time came, God blessed him far abundantly than anything that Mordecai would have even asked for. If God says, okay, you did right, I'm going to bless you, what do you want? Mordecai probably, take care of Esther, But when it came time to reward him, man, did God bless him. And it all worked, behind the scenes. All things work together for good. Them love the Lord and called according to His purpose. We might not be able to see it, but it's definitely God is working behind the scenes there. Last week we stopped here with the humorous story, hilarious story if you think about it, of Haman, who was so frustrated with Mordecai that he couldn't stand it, that he made the gallows to hang Mordecai on, went back and was going to tell the king what he wanted to do. And while he was there, for the banquet, he went to the king and he was going to tell him, we need to get Mordecai. And then the king starts this little speech about, what should I do to the man that I should honor above all else? And of course, Haman, there's his ego. His pride was that obviously this is all about me, and I'm going to bend, and am I going to get what I want? Give me your horse, give me your ring, give me your garments. I mean, how arrogant is that? And the king agreed with him on that. Man, this is good, getting better and better all the time. And then he said, okay, Mordecai, what you asked for, that's exactly what I'll do. Go give it to Haman, go give it to Mordecai. And I mean, just your world ends at that point. But then when he, later on when he runs to the queen trying to get help, when Esther finally says, the reason I want this banquet, king, is you told me I can have anything I wanted. Well, there's this guy who's trying to kill all of my people, and I just think you need to know who he is. And he's Haman, by the way. And the king's, he's so livid. I picture this in my mind. I mean, when you read this story, it's such a visual.
You do.
It is that you can't stop seeing that. The king so mad, you can see his anger, and he runs out, walks out on the balcony, and Haman thought, what we're going to do? And he runs over and trips and falls on the queen. I mean, that's the worst thing. I mean, if he fell out the window, he'd been better off. But the king.
Funny.
King walks in and thinks, all this now you're trying to rape my wife? Oh, man. And then tells the guards to take him away, and one of them says, he made a gallows for Mordecai. Well, there's 70-foot high gallows. I mean, all the town could see what took place
Be
there.
careful of the holes you dig.
But, in spite of all this, there was still a big problem. And the problem was that Haman had went to the king earlier, remember, and said, there's a people that don't follow you and they're trying to take you. Let's cast lots. And so they cast lots. And, here's God working too, because the lots didn't fall the right way until they got to the 12th month. Not the first, second, third, or even 10th, which gave plenty of time, but the furthest away you possibly get on the 13th day of Adar, A-D-A-R, which would be around February, March. First month is Nisan, which is March, April. That's why Easter falls when it does. But the 12th month, so our calendar, February, March, is when the decree goes into play. And it was a law of the Medes and Persians, meaning the king had no authority to stop the law. And it sounds like such a, for us, if you've read the passage, you've studied this, you know how God worked it out. And it's such a simple solution that nobody could think of. Of course it's so simple because we read it. If it was up to us to figure it out, we'd probably never come up with it. We'd probably think, well, all the Jews ought to be killed that day.
We'll be like, God, really? That'll be simple.
Yeah, it's like duh.
We're like all smart. Really?
But this is a fulfillment of a covenant that God made with the Jews. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. They shall all come to the earth be blessed. So Haman wanted to kill all the Jews. Let me read you a little story here. I'll come back to this. But
Oh, we love stories.
well, it's a historical record here. This is actually found in your Wilmington's Guide, so I'm not going to read all of it, read parts of it. Oh, it doesn't come up, it doesn't. Shut that down.
The two books of the female characters, I always thought I loved Ruth, and I do. But Esther is just amazing.
She is awesome.
She's amazing. I love the book of Esther too.
Yeah, and just like Dr. Kay was saying, when I read that, I see it. And that's how I teach. I teach visual. That's good. Because I want people to see what they're reading. And that way you will remember it. Yes, you will.
You know what happens with me on the book of how the books that I visualize when I read are the Kings. First and Second Kings.
Oh,
To me, they look like I'm watching a show. I am not joking. It's like I'm there.
Everybody can't do that.
It's just
You
crazy.
have to.
Here in Wilmington's Guide, we've got time to go into it a little bit.
I'm sorry.
There's a historical event took place on March 1st, 1953. Joseph Stalin, the ruler of the Soviet Union, World War II had ended in 1945, and Stalin was part of the Allies. Russia and the United States actually were on the same side in World War II. And as a kid, it took me a long time to realize that, because I always thought Russia's a bad guy. They couldn't be our friends. But after the war, Stalin had decided that he wanted to exterminate all the Jews in the Soviet Union. So March 1st, 8 years after the Holocaust, that took 6 million lives, Stalin unveiled a proposal to liquidate all the Jews out of the Soviet Union, which was about 3 million at that point. 6 million had died in the Holocaust. He wanted to get rid of 3 million more. And the proposal was due to go into effect on March the 9th. But it didn't happen because Stalin ended up having a stroke and died. Well, this story was verified by a woman by the name of Lyudmila Lafanova, who was part of the Soviet Union, as a librarian in some of the Soviet Union archives. And so she told the story here. Stalin hated the Jews, and that was well known even during World War II. It was well known he did that. Like I said, I'm going to skip through the story. If you can go to Wilmington's Guide, I think it's still in the new Wilmington's Guide. But anyway, 1953, Stalin announced this decision that he made. So, basically on March 1st, 1953 at noon, Stalin called for a meeting of the Politburo, which was the government of the Kremlin, and read it to the Soviet leaders, his plan for extermination of the Jews. And he made up this plot and said that we know that the Jews are trying to overthrow us, therefore we need to stop this before they do that. So he's trying to justify his actions here. But he said they've admitted that they want to overthrow us. He told his men, the Jews want to overthrow us, and they've admitted the fact they want to murder us. Right? So he said that on the 9th of March they will be hanged in Red Square for all to see, but not even this punishment will satisfy our people. The masses anger, so not just this one group of Jews who's trying to get us, but our people don't be satisfied just killing these, so we need to get rid of all of them. And so he devised a plan to send them, a lot of them to Siberia, which is a horrible, horrible place to live. The temperatures get so far below zero. People do live there, but it's a very, very regular life. But his goal wasn't really to send them there. His goal was to put them on trains to there, and then along the way have them murdered. Well, of the 2/3 fall victim to the anger of the masses. So along the way, these people, every train stop, we had more and more killed of our people, was his goal. But after outlining the plans for the March 9th, beginning of the extermination of 3 million Jews, on March 2nd, Stalin had a stroke. He died on March 5th, and at the beginning of the day for the extermination, that was the day of Stalin's funeral. So he already set aside a day to kill them all, and that's actually when his funeral was observed. March 1st, 1953 was the Feast of Purim. Right? Of course, the Soviet Union doesn't recognize it, but that's when it happened. Purim, we know, started here in the book of Esther, around 453 BC. Oops. I left part of it out, I think. Well, anyway. Yeah, there's a line that comes. Just tell you what the story was. You don't have to read it. But the point being that if Stalin had his way, he'd exterminate all these Jews. But instead, the Feast of Purim began on March 1st. Purim ended on March 9th. The very day that his body was put on display was the Feast of Purim. The irony there is that the Feast of Purim stopped the extermination of the Jews. Here again in 1953, God stopped the extermination of Jews with the death of Stalin. He decided to kill them all, and God said, that's not going to happen. And God gave him a stroke, and that stopped that. So very significant. I had a student here for years, Anya Borgen, who was born in Soviet Union, at that time still Soviet Union. Her father was Jewish, and his name was Orman. But as a child, she had to change her name from Orman to Garavanova, her mother's maiden name. Her and her brother had to change his name to Garanov, and her to Garanova, an A at the end symbolizes male or female. And so, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to go to college. And so even as a kid, they changed the name so they'd grow up with a Russian name instead of a Jewish name. If this law went into effect, Anya would not have been born, because her father worked for the government back in March of '53, and he would have been the first one to be killed. And so she would not even existed if that went through. Now I always think, how ironic is that? That he's going to kill all the Jews, just like Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, and Stalin dies during the Feast of Purim. And is that coincidence? No, I don't think so. I believe God working behind the scenes in a mighty way to show that He is still in control, and no matter what people try to do, and people will wreak havoc on the world. There's no doubt about that. But God's still in control. We see other cases in the Bible. People judged by the conditions of the Abrahamic covenant. Pharaoh learned that the people could not, the Jews could not be drowned. remember he decided when the population of the Jews got so great,
Okay.
there's a camera right there. Now everybody saw you hat.
Yeah.
But remember, the Egyptians had reached a point where they were afraid of the Jews because the Jews' population had increased so dramatically, well over 3 million Jews, and they put them as slaves, afraid that they were going to take over. And then he decided to drown the male children. And of course Moses, that was supposed to be his fate, and ended up God saving him. And then how did Pharaoh die?
Did he get drowned?
He drowned.
Mm-hmm.
In the Red Sea. When the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, then God closed the water back upon him. Now, if you watch the movie The Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner lived. In reality, Yul Brynner drowned. or Pharaoh, anyway. Nebuchadnezzar made a decree to throw the 3 Hebrew boys into the fiery furnace. What happened? I always say, it is true. You think about it. The very worst thing that could have happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that day, the very worst thing that could happen is what happened. Because if they were thrown into the pit and died, that would be the best thing that ever happened to them. And going to heaven's far better than staying.
I see what you're saying.
Darius, he made a decree to throw all the anybody who didn't who worship incorrectly into the lion's den, and he had no problem with that until he realized what? Oh, it's Daniel. I love Daniel,
Oh, yeah.
but I made a law of the Medes and Persians. I can't change that law, and so the law was fulfilled that anybody would be thrown into the lion's den. But the law didn't say that the lions had to eat a person.
That's true, I didn't think about it like that.
But the lions were hungry, because when the ones who tried to get Daniel tricked him, and this happened, yeah, before they even hit the bottom, they was already chewed up.
But God.
But,
There was Haman again, thought he could destroy all the Jews, ended up being hanged. And then what happened? Well, the king, Ahasuerus,
I like his name.
Ezra, he ended up giving Esther Haman's property. And Haman was a very, very wealthy man, remember. Here again, that's where pride gets you. Haman was a foreigner, came in as a slave, ended up being number 2, basically the ruler under the king, with all the wealth that he could possibly want in life, but it wasn't enough.
I mean, people would bow down to him right after
Yeah.
he came. He was like second in command.
Yeah, I mean, he was,
and he just got so upset because Malachi wouldn't bow.
yeah, one guy would
One
bow
guy.
down to.
All everybody else is bowing, but one, just one guy.
And then he let his hatred for the Jews
Yeah.
to control him.
He was really jealous.
Well, he remembered what the Jews did to his people, the Amalekites. And of course, after this, Mordecai and Esther both they didn't know what to do either. They didn't know how to fix this, and so they go to the king and ask the king to fix it. But the law of Medes and Persians was made unchangeable. The king himself, the king decided that I'm going to stop this, then he would have suffered death probably, because the laws of Medes and Persians was in place. And sometimes the answers are so easy, but we don't see them. And this is a tough one for them. What we do, the 13th day of Adar, all our people are going to die. You got it on?
One more leg, one more line. I was busy
Oh,
listening.
you moved it and you put it back.
I put it
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thought it looked familiar, didn't it?
But I love God's irony. how he was like, oh, you know, your garment and your ring and all this, and then the extreme was the gallows and all that, and Mordecai gets that, and he gets the
Yeah.
complete opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a job opening.
Yeah.
And Mordecai took his job.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's like, what a coincidence. Nice that you mentioned that, there is an opening.
Mm.
Let's put him over there.
Yeah.
Well, the simple answer that nobody could see was, on a certain day of the year, all the Jews would be killed. Then the law was another law was made. Well, let's let the Jews defend themselves. Oh, duh! Why didn't I think of that? That's all it is. That's all you got. Yeah, give them the ability to defend themselves. Now I believe there's another story that took place behind the scenes here that aided this, that helped this situation. When Mordecai found out what Haman was wanting to do, what did he do? First thing he did, when Mordecai found out about the decree, he went to Esther.
To Esther, to go to
And
her.
Esther said what? What?
Well, she at first she refused it, she said she couldn't do it.
Yeah.
She said she couldn't just go to the king
Yeah, she'll die.
Yeah.
without.
And so what did she suggest?
Oh,
She
fast.
suggests fasting.
Fast, 3-day fast.
3 days.
All right. What happens during a fast? According to the Bible,
Oh, you're supposed to pray and turn your plate down.
turn your plate down and then do what?
Pray?
This other thing.
It doesn't say there, pray.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily say pray, but
Right.
yeah, that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something else you do during a fast. In Isaiah 58, it tells you to do what?
Do something for somebody else.
Yeah.
Do something for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You do what? You give them food, you give them clothing, you give them housing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, would you give that to somebody who's fasting? If I'm fasting and I say I can't have my food, but you can have my food, you would say what? Huh? I'm fasting too.
Yeah.
So who do I give my food to then?
So the other people, the
To
ones that's gonna be out, what
The
the
Persians.
Persians, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to give the Persians, you have to serve the Persians during that
Right.
fasting.
Right.
And they also fasted other times during the year as well. So now, during this fasting, you have been helping your Persian neighbors.
Mhm.
Now it comes time when your Persian neighbors have the right to kill you.
Uh-huh.
They don't have to kill you, but they have the right to kill you. But what have you been doing to them for the last year?
You've been serving them.
Serving them, helping them, giving them.
Right.
And now it comes time for the decree to be honored, and they think, why would I kill him? He's been good to me. Yeah? So again, behind the scenes, God was working
I
in such
didn't
a way
catch it,
that,
I didn't catch
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I love it, yeah.
yeah, so that's it. I mean, you have to give to others, and
Oh, my goodness.
they're the only ones you can give to.
He's got a way that's mighty
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. And just, again, God's decree from,
Yeah.
before.
And I'm not gonna bite the hand that feeds
There
me.
you
Yeah, yeah. Why would I hate him? He's been good to
There
me.
you go.
I tell you.
The institution of Purim, and actually I misspelled that word. Well, I think some people spell it with one R, some with two.
And I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
I've seen it both
Uh,
ways.
Per is the word for lot. Okay, like you cast lots.
Uh-huh.
And so that you cast per, singular. I am, on the end of a word in the Bible, makes it plural. You've seen the word cherubim.
Mhm.
Sometimes you, in the Bible, actually you see cherubims. In fact, I think very often you see cherubims. That's kind of incorrect because cherub is one. Cherubim is plural.
Oh, cool, right.
Well, the King James editors put an S on the end of it. Now, were they wrong in what they're doing? Today we would say they're wrong because we know that I am. But in the days and times the King James was edited, everybody understood that an S made it plural. And so they put an S on there for people to understand that it was more than one. I think there's probably very few people in the church may recognize that I am makes it plural. And so they need the S too, in order to understand that it's more than one. Cherub is one, cherubim is more than one. Per is one, Purim, it means more than one. So it's just lots. So the casting of lots is what this refers to. Not a big deal, but you do see the I am makes it plural. A lot of words in the Bible, if you see.
Yeah, the King James Version have fishes.
Yeah,
And
you
I was
can,
like, why did they put
fishes is actually correct.
Fishes is correct?
And as well as fish is correct. So, some people say, I caught a bunch of fishes, we'd laugh at them, but you can go to the dictionary and find, oh, they're right. It can be, either one can be used.
Okay, okay.
But, we've grown up with the word fish as being singular or plural. Yeah. So the Jews prepared themselves and were able to slaughter their enemies. They did kill, the Jews did. I mean, everybody wanted the Jews to survive. There's always hatred and always prejudice among people, even though they benefit from the prejudice, they still want to keep it, the benefit from getting rid of the prejudice. But they still want to maintain their prejudice. Well, like Haman himself. I mean, if Haman hadn't been so prejudiced against them, we wouldn't be talking about this story.
That's right.
He'd been satisfied being the number 2 man in the land, a foreign land, and with all the riches he could ever desire. But that prejudice is what destroyed him. So Purim basically celebrates their deliverance.
Okay, go back, I just want to get the scripture
Okay.
on the one before this.
Move before this?
Uh-huh,
Oh, okay.
please. Oh, no, okay, 9 and 10. Okay,
That's chapters 9 and 10.
thank you.
Now, Mordecai was respected by the Jews as well as the Gentiles, the Persians at the time. When you think about the whole story here, you see that Esther and Mordecai were there because they were taken into captivity. They could have went back home back in 536 at the beginning of the book of Ezra. They had the right to do that when many of the Jews under Zerubbabel and Joshua took them back to rebuild the temple. But they chose to stay there, and then God used them in a great and mighty way. And so the Jews and Gentiles both respected Mordecai. Amen. Oh. The last, actually, next week we'll go back to the book of Ezra. Remember, first chapters of Ezra. There's a 60-year gap between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Ezra that we're not told really what happens as far as that, except for we know the book of Esther occurred during that time period. And so that's why we studied the first 6 chapters of Ezra. Now we'll go back and study the last chapters of Ezra to see where all this fit in the middle and how God would use it. All right, let's take a long break.